Your phone buzzes at 6:14 in the morning with a text from your sister that reads only, "He's gone. Last night. Please come home." And you stare at those 4 words for a full minute. Before the grief actually reaches you, before your knees genuinely start to shake in the middle of your kitchen with your coffee going cold on the counter, your father, Garrick Thistlewood, the man who taught you to change a tire in a gravel driveway when you were 14, who sat through every single dance recital, even when his construction job left him, exhausted and covered in drywall dust, has died in his sleep at 71 years old. And you are supposed to be at your desk in 90 minutes. Your name is Reyna Ashworth, and you have worked as a senior account manager at Calloway Brenner Consulting for 6 years, long enough to know exactly how this is going to go, before you even pick up the phone to call your supervisor. You dial anyway because that's what responsible people do, because you've spent your whole career being the employee who never causes problems. And when your boss, Desmond Calloway, answers on the second ring, you tell him through a voice that's already cracking that your father passed away overnight, and you need to take the day, possibly the week, to be with your family. There's a pause on the other end of the line that lasts just slightly too long, and then Desmond says the words that will follow you for the rest of your life. "I'm sorry for your loss, Reyna, truly, but the Calloway account presentation is at 2 o'clock today, and you're the only one who can run it. Can you handle the personal stuff after? Or do I need to find someone else for this account permanently?" If you've ever had someone ask you to choose between grief and survival in the same breath, you already know the particular kind of cold that settles into your chest when it happens. Stay with me here, because what unfolds over the next several weeks in Reyna's life is going to remind you that sometimes the people watching quietly from a distance are paying far more attention than you'd ever guess. Go ahead and hit subscribe before we continue, because this channel exists to tell stories exactly like hers. You don't quit that morning, even though every instinct in your body is screaming at you to hang up the phone and never look back. You can't. Your father's funeral costs are already stacking up in your mind. Your mother's modest pension barely covers her own bills, and you are quite simply terrified of what happens to your family's finances if you lose your job in the same week you lose your father. So you go to the 2 o'clock meeting. You sit through the Calloway presentation with your father's death 4 hours old, delivering numbers and projections in a voice you don't recognize as your own, excusing yourself once to the bathroom where you sob silently into a paper towel for 90 seconds before splashing water on your face and walking back into that conference room like nothing happened at all. The funeral is scheduled for the following Thursday, a modest service at Grace Hollow Cemetery where your father will be laid to rest beside his own parents, and you request the day off nearly a full week in advance, giving Desmond every possible opportunity to plan around your absence. He tells you it should be fine. He tells you, in fact, right up until Wednesday evening, that he's arranged coverage, that you have nothing to worry about, that of course you should be with your family on a day like this. Then at 9:40 that night, less than 12 hours before your father's funeral, your phone rings with his name on the screen, and something in your stomach drops before you even answer. He tells you the Prescott merger. Documents need final review before an early morning. Call with investors. That the associate who was supposed to cover it called in sick. That he genuinely doesn't know who else could possibly handle something this sensitive on such short notice. He asks in a tone that somehow manages to sound both apologetic and entirely unmovable at the same time. If there's any way you could just step out during the service, even for 20 minutes, to review the documents remotely, you tell him no. You tell him, with a steadiness that surprises even you, that you will not be leaving your father's funeral to review merger paperwork. He goes quiet for a moment, then says coldly that he understands, but that this kind of thing gets noticed. That loyalty during hard moments is exactly what separates people who get promoted from people who get left behind. You barely sleep that night. You spend most of it lying awake beside your husband, staring at the ceiling, replaying that phone call over and over, feeling a specific kind of fury you've never quite felt before. Not just grief for your father, but rage at a system that seems to think your love for him should come with a deadline. The funeral itself is achingly beautiful in the way funerals sometimes manage to be. Sunlight breaking through gray clouds just as the pastor begins to speak. Your father's old co-workers from the construction crew standing in a respectful line near the back, work boots polished for the occasion. You deliver the eulogy yourself, voice shaking through stories about gravel driveways and dance recitals. And for those 40 minutes, you managed to forget entirely about Desmond Calloway and merger documents and everything else waiting for you back at that office. What you don't know, standing at that graveside with your mother's hand gripped tightly in yours, is that Desmond has already sent a company-wide email that morning, seeing 3 members of the executive board, expressing concern about your reliability during a critical client transition, framing your refusal to review documents as a pattern of prioritizing personal matters over professional obligations. He doesn't mention that personal matters meant burying your father. He simply plants the seed carefully, deliberately, the kind of corporate maneuvering that looks professional on paper and feels like a betrayal in your gut. You return to work the following Monday, exhausted, grieving, running on almost no sleep, and you can feel something different in the air the moment you walk through the doors. Colleagues who normally chat with you in the break room suddenly seem too busy to make eye contact. Your assistant mentions hesitantly that there's been talk about the Prescott account, about whether you're still the right fit to lead it. You corner Desmond in his office that afternoon, and when you ask him directly whether he's been undermining you to the board, he doesn't even bother denying it. He tells you flatly that business doesn't stop for grief, that he needs people he can count on completely, and that maybe this whole situation has revealed something about your priorities that the company needs to seriously consider. You leave his office that day feeling smaller than you've felt in years, certain that your 6 years of loyal, exceptional work are about to be erased by a man who couldn't even give you a single day to bury your father without a phone call. What you don't know, what nobody in the building knows, in fact, is that the board's newest member, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Odalys Ferris, has been sitting in on meetings for the past 3 weeks as part of a routine leadership review, watching everything, saying almost nothing, taking notes that no one thinks to ask about. Odalys joined the Calloway Brenner board 6 months ago, after selling her own consulting firm, and she has a particular, deeply personal reason for paying close attention to exactly how this company treats its employees during moments of crisis, a reason none of her colleagues on the board know about yet. Odalys had read Desmond's company-wide email the morning of your father's funeral, and something about its tone, the careful corporate language, wrapped around what was clearly punitive intent, had stopped her cold. She'd requested quietly that HR pull your full personnel file, and what she found told a very different story than the one Desmond had been carefully constructing. 6 years of exemplary performance reviews, 0 prior incidents, a track record of taking on extra work without complaint, of covering for colleagues during their own family emergencies without ever once asking for the same grace in return. She began asking careful questions around the office, quiet conversations with people who trusted her enough to be honest. Your assistant, a junior associate who'd witnessed the funeral phone call secondhand, even a member of the Prescott account team who casually mentioned how impressed the client had been with your composure at the 2 o'clock presentation, the very day your father died. Piece by piece, Odalys assembled a picture of exactly what had happened, and it made her furious in a way she hadn't expected because it reminded her, uncomfortably, of her own mother, a woman who had spent 30 years working for a boss who once denied her 3 days of bereavement leave when her own husband died, a wound that never fully healed and that Odalys had promised herself she would never allow to happen to someone else if she ever had the power to stop it. 3 weeks after your father's funeral, you're called into an emergency board meeting with almost no warning, and you walk into that conference room bracing yourself for termination, certain this is the moment Desmond's quiet campaign finally reaches its conclusion. Instead, you find yourself sitting across from 4 board members, including Odalys, who asks you, gently but directly, to walk them through exactly what happened over the past month. Starting with the morning you learned your father had died, you tell them everything. The 2 o'clock presentation 4 hours after the death. The Wednesday night phone call demanding you step out of the funeral. The company-wide email you never even knew existed until Odalys mentions it. Watching your face carefully as the color drains from it in real time. By the time you finish speaking, the room is silent in a way that feels heavier than any silence you've ever sat in. Desmond is called into the room next, and Odalys asks him calmly to explain the email, the phone call, the pattern the board has been quietly documenting for 3 weeks. He tries to spin it the way he's spun everything else, talking about business necessity and client obligations, and the pressures of running a competitive firm, but Odalys simply slides a printed copy of his own email across the table and asks him to read the second paragraph aloud, the one where he explicitly frames your grief as a reliability concern. He can't finish reading it. His voice trails off somewhere in the middle, and for the first time since you've known him, Desmond Calloway looks genuinely afraid. The board votes that same afternoon, and the decision is unanimous. Desmond is terminated effective immediately, escorted from the building by security before the end of the day, his name quietly removed from the company letterhead within the week. The story doesn't stay quiet for long. Word spreads through the office like wildfire. Colleagues who avoided your eyes just days earlier now, stopping by your desk to apologize for not speaking up sooner, to admit they'd noticed the way you were being treated and hadn't known what to do about it. Odalys asks to speak with you privately once the board meeting ends, and it's there, sitting across from you in a much smaller, much quieter room, that she tells you about her mother, about the boss who denied her 3 days to grieve her own husband, about the promise Odalys made to herself as a teenager watching her mother swallow that particular grief in silence. She tells you the company is instituting a new bereavement policy immediately, one guaranteeing employees a full week of paid leave with 0 client obligations, following the death of an immediate family member, and that she'd like your input in drafting it, because she believes no policy written by executives who've never lived through this kind of loss will ever truly understand what people actually need. You help write that policy over the following month, pouring into it every single thing you wish someone had told Desmond the morning you called him in tears, that grief doesn't pause for quarterly deadlines, that loyalty built on fear isn't loyalty at all, that a company's true character reveals itself not in how it treats people during easy seasons, but in how it treats them during the hardest weeks of their lives. The policy is adopted company-wide within 2 months. Formally named the Thistlewood Bereavement Standard after your father, a small but permanent piece of him woven into the fabric of a company that once tried to make you choose between honoring him and keeping your job. You're promoted to Director of Client Relations 6 months later, a role Desmond himself once told you that you weren't quite ready for, and you accept it standing in the same office where he once questioned your priorities, now occupied by Odalys, who shakes your hand with a warmth that feels nothing like the cold calculation you'd grown used to in that room. Your mother keeps a framed copy of the new bereavement policy on her mantle beside your father's photograph, telling anyone who visits that her husband, in death, ended up protecting more grieving families than he ever could have imagined in life. You still think about that Wednesday night phone call sometimes? The particular cruelty of being asked to step away from your father's funeral for merger paperwork, but it no longer carries the same sharp sting it once did. It's simply proof now of how far you've come, evidence that the version of you who once apologized for grieving on a company timeline no longer exists, replaced by someone who understands, finally, that the people who truly deserve your loyalty are the ones who never once ask you to prove it at your own father's graveside. Grief should never come with a deadline, and the people who understand that are the only ones who ever truly deserved your loyalty in the first place.